lean mass hyper responders
Yeah.
and in bodybuilders too, just as a side tangent quick for somebody who's trying to hit high carbohydrate intake needs as a bodybuilder, because this is something that you're going to find. And I know this is probably like pre honey fruit era, Paul, but before you've spoken how you think that a carnivore diet could be just as conducive to muscle building like in a state of keto, which I think now you would probably say like there's no fucking way.
Probably
But
disagree with that. I disagree
yeah,
with that, Paul. Yeah.
yeah. So now, though, in the context of like these intellogenic cascades that I referred to earlier being so critical for growth factor production, proliferation, and leading to anabolic processes downstream, what would you suggest for a bodybuilder who's like pushing the carbohydrate vector really hard? Because oftentimes it's not them needing to push the protein to like, 2 grams per pound or anything crazy. It's more like 1 gram to 1.25 per pound of body weight, but it's the carbs that get to like 500, 600, 700 grams when they're getting really, really big. Do those individuals just eat honey and fruit, or would you advise like starting to implement things like rice and stuff like that in order to
I
hit
think
those needs?
I think to get 500 grams of carbohydrates a day, you should think about rice.
Yeah.
Yeah, think about some white rice. And you know what? Like, if you're interested and you're at this level and you want to try and think about this, check your fasting insulin, get a pre and a post DEXA, look at your visceral fat. Tell me the results because I'm so curious. Like, it would be fascinating to show that 500 grams of carbohydrates a day. And I'm not convinced that it would increase visceral fat, but I think we should do some, casual experiments like 500 grams a day visceral of carbohydrates from a combination of fruit, honey, and rice. I wouldn't get all 500 grams of carbohydrates from rice because fruit is delicious, but at that level, you're putting so much in your stomach that I don't really understand what these guys are doing. I think you might need to get rice. Honey is great. You could eat a lot of freaking honey, man. Like, it's probably not cost effective, but you could definitely eat a pound of honey a day. I could do that. No problem, Derek. Like, it's so easy to eat a hot pound. I don't think I've ever eaten a pound of honey in a day, but if you challenge me to do it, I could do it.
Now, would you still recommend that much sugar intake for somebody who has a higher base level of oxidative stress from the anabolics and whatnot too? Because I don't really know, like, I don't actually know what leads to plaque development in terms of like inflammation, oxidative stress, blah, blah, blah. Like, I don't know what cofactors lead to this manifestation of it realistically. So like in an individual who has like a base level of stress from exogenous hormones, should they be mindful of that and maybe be like, lesser on the sugar vector or things that are, I don't know.
It's a good question. I'd say test, right? Check your HSCRP, check other metrics. Fibrinogen is another good metric. Check other metrics of oxidative stress, GGT, gamma glutamyl transferase, watch your liver enzymes, do all that stuff while you're doing it and kind of triangulate in that special situation. I don't think honey is intrinsically inflammatory.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe at 500 grams, it becomes an overload. Maybe not. Experiment. When I was in Tanzania, if we found a hive of honey, the 3 hunters that I was with would eat 90% of it and then give like a little bit to the rest of the tribe. They would just go ham on it in the backcountry and eat all of it. They would eat a ton. We were just eating like these huge honeycombs and they would just eat it. That's how it is out there. Like, if you get honey in the backcountry, it's yours. You bring back maybe like 1/10 for the tribe.
Okay. Last question. So the lean mass hyper responder thing, like these are individuals who seem to have high LDLs, but they are otherwise like very athletic looking and, I don't know, jacked in some cases. Like I have one natural who I'm looking at his blood work now. He is like one of the premier faces of like natural bodybuilding, I guess. Like he's a very, very accomplished natural athlete and looks amazing. He maintains like sub 10% body fat year round with normal looking testosterone levels. Like he doesn't seem to have any like significant gonadotropin suppression or anything. And his LDL is clinically high. Like somebody might tell him like, oh, you should be on a statin or a ezetimibe and like maybe get that down. I have another friend too, who has, I don't even know what you would call this, if it's still a hyper responder or not, but some individuals that are like, their total testosterone is super physiological naturally, where they'll walk around with like a 1500, 1600 total. And I think his feedback loop is just like something about it is messed up. He actually has an adrenal tumor, which they found via, I think it was an ultrasound or something, or MRI. And for him though, his gonadotropins are always, his LH is always high. his total T is like 1600, 1700 almost every single time. And his LP little a and total cholesterol and LDL are like through the fucking roof. But he's like an athletic, lean, healthy guy. You can tell seemingly that his predisposition also drives his entrepreneurial like behavior. Like he's a very accomplished individual. And it's hard to kind of look at it and be like, hey, dude, like you should probably get on like a PCSK9 inhibitor or something, when it might be the reason he has like these like hormone like advantages. But at the same time, it's like, I don't know, is he going to end up with like ball cancer one day from all the LH, or like, I don't know what to tell him. Has
he had a calcium scan?
Not yet, but he's in his 30s. I wouldn't know if calcium would show up yet. Would it? Like if
it could. Like, I mean,
doesn't that take like years for calcification to actually manifest itself?
No, it does not. If the LDL is very high, most radiologists would say that if you're, how high did you say his LDL was?
I would have to pull that up. I actually have it. Just give me a sec. Sorry.
So most cardiac radiologists would say that a year or two of elevated LDL is enough to see meaningful plaque progression in the arteries. So your point is well taken. And
so you would just look at like what percentile they're in for their age bracket and then kind of extrapolate out, even though they're young.
Yeah. I mean, you could, if he had any plaque in his early 30s, he would be in the 99th percentile. But it would be telling to say, hey, if this were the situation and his LDL has been high for years and he has a 0 calcium score, it's not perfect because it doesn't get uncalcified plaque. You could do a CT coronary angiogram, which is also a small amount, or it's not as much radiation as it used to be. You could do a CT coronary angiogram and confirm that and say, hey, this is an interesting case study. Like, just get a CTA or get a coronary scan every 2 years and be like, we don't see the progression of plaque in your arteries. Get a fasting insulin, wear a CGM. It would still be meaningful.
So LP little a was 93.6 with a reference interval of less than 75. His apolipoprotein B was 114. Let's see. Total test 1300, free test 22, both in nanograms per deciliter. So both clinically high. This was just his most recent one that I have. LH.
Do you have a pure LDL in milligrams per deciliter?
Yeah, I'm getting up to it here. So I have LDL P is 1840. LDL C is 150, which I guess isn't as bad as some of his previous ones that I've seen.
No,
that's actually not bad at all, right?
Lower than mine.
Yeah. Total cholesterol 215. Small LDL P 663, but his HDL is 55. Triglycerides 71. Otherwise,
doesn't have a fasting insulin.
Oh, he has a fasting insulin too. I can find that.
I mean, that LDL is lower than mine.
His fasting insulin is only 2.
There you go. He's pretty metabolically healthy. So I think at this point, like those LDL numbers don't really blow my hair back, much at all. My LDL is usually 200, 220, 230. My triglycerides are low. My HDL is usually quite high, 85 for what it's worth. And my fasting insulin's low. So if I see that guy in clinic and he's worried, I might say, hey, get a coronary artery calcium scan, get a CTA, prove to yourself you have 0. If you don't have 0, take a different course. But before you I don't think many cardiologists would put this guy on a PCSK9 inhibitor with an LDL.
No, it must've been an old blood test I saw.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is different for sure.
Yeah. Those have some pretty significant side effects too, that could be problematic. So,
do they? Like, I know they have side effects, but like, I wasn't aware of like what they are. In terms of severity. I'd
have to go back and look at it. There were some significant concerns about PCSK9 inhibitors, but yeah, it's an interesting realm. So lean mass hyperresponder, as you say, is people who end up with, they're generally lean, but they end up with a high LDL and generally low triglycerides and a moderate or high HDL. So these are metabolically healthy people who have what Dave Feldman calls the triad of high LDL, low triglycerides, high HDL, and they're metabolically healthy. And so the question is, do they accumulate atherosclerosis at the same level as someone with an equivalent LDL who might be diabetic or less metabolically healthy? And that's a fascinating question, because if the answer is no, then the mainstream LDL paradigm needs revision, and that will change the face of medicine, because so many things in medicine are based around LDL. I mean, saturated fat is beneficial for humans hormonally. I'm sure you've covered this on your channel, testosterone, so many things. And then all the things in saturated fat. We talked about stearic acid a little bit, odd chain fatty acids, but doctors won't tell people to eat animal fat because it's going to raise the LDL, and they will condone seed oils because they lower LDL, ignoring the fact that in interventional studies, which are small but out there, when you give people seed oils in exchange for saturated fat, the oxidized LDL goes up, the LP little a goes up, but the LDL goes down. That sounds bad from an oxidative stress perspective, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of, I think, handicap in Western medicine and the way we see metabolic health and cholesterol around saturated fat and LDL. If we can let go of the LDL demon and think about LDL contextually, there may be some different dietary recommendations, and then I think we would understand things better. But Dave Feldman has a study ongoing now with Matt Buttigieg, I think is his name. I'm probably butchering the name of the cardiac radiologist who's doing the CTAs, but they have two cohorts. One is just a regular cohort, and one is a cohort of lean mass hyperresponders, and they're comparing with CTAs over the course of a year to see how much the atherosclerosis progresses. And so when that study comes out, who knows? There's people on the panel who believe they will progress, and there's people who are neutral. And I don't think that they will progress as quickly as people would believe they would, or maybe not at all. But the clear thing they got from this preeminent cardiac radiologist was, they're going to progress. Like their LDLs 300, 400, 500, you're going to see atherosclerotic progression. And if they don't, there's going to be some really interesting questions about if the paradigm around LDL/ApoB is complete, or we really need to contextualize it. And I would argue for the latter.
Interesting. Hopefully it doesn't get, buried if the results are in favor of opposing the kind of standard paradigm.
Oh, it'll be a cannon blast if that's what happens. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But who knows? Yeah, we'll hear about it at least. Yeah. But this metformin study, a lot of people are talking about this metformin study. I think there's questions about that one. Again, metformin is beneficial, but why don't we fix the diabetes at the root, or at least recommend that, and not ignore the fact that another thing could be problematic for humans hormonally.